Okay, have you ever actually stopped to wonder, why does a cat happily eat fish while a sheep flat out refuses? I mean, it seems like a pretty simple fact of nature, right? But an incredibly unique text we're exploring today uses this exact question as the starting point for a really wild thought experiment. According to the author, the answer isn't just about personal preference or even habitat. It fundamentally comes down to their underlying structure. A cat and a sheep behave differently simply because their life structures are fundamentally different.
And according to the text, this concept of structure dictates way more than just what's on the menu. It actually dictates lifespan itself. Just look at the comparisons for a second. A worker bee lives for about 2 months. Us humans, we live for roughly 60 to 80 years. But then, the author introduces the concept of a super celestial being, which supposedly lives for thousands or even billions of years. The text proposes a fascinating, if definitely unconventional premise. These vastly different lifespans are strictly dictated by life structure, which, of course, sparks the ultimate question for us. If structure determines lifespan, can we intentionally change our structure to live longer?
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are breaking down a highly esoteric philosophy from a text titled Advanced Cultivation, Creating the Super Celestial Structure to Absorb Special Energy. It's a text that blends observable physics with some incredibly deep spiritual longevity claims. Okay, let's dive into this incredibly unique philosophy.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the power of structure, the entropy of life, the dissipative solution, the celestial mindset, and finally, absorbing special energy. Let's get started.
All right, part 1, the power of structure. Structure dictates function.
So the baseline premise of the source material is that absolutely everything's function, its capability, and its lifespan is deeply rooted in its physical and structural makeup. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the author actually uses observable everyday science to build the foundation for their spiritual theory. Think about it. Why does asbestos insulate when metal conducts? Why does liquid gasoline catch fire while water puts it out? Or, going back to the bees, why does a queen bee live for years while a worker bee dies in mere months? The text argues that these fundamental differences lie entirely in their structures.
Moving right along to part 2, the entropy of life, or the threat of isolation. If structure is literally everything, then what exactly is the structural problem that limits human lifespans? Well, the author identifies a central threat, the extreme danger of closed systems. To explain this, the author borrows a term straight from thermodynamics, entropy. Now, in thermodynamics, entropy is basically a measure of disorder. But used here, in this text, it represents what happens when a life structure becomes totally isolated and closed off. The author argues that, in a closed system, entropy just keeps building up until external energy can no longer enter and the system inevitably, well, suffocates and moves toward death.
The text actually uses a highly relatable analogy to illustrate this kind of emotional and structural entropy, the transition from the absolute freshness of first love to a settled marriage. The author argues that lovers often lose their passion because their emotional structure becomes isolated. It gets closed off. Their emotional entropy gradually reaches a saturation point, effectively killing the passion. To continually feel the thrill of life, the text insists, your structure has to remain entirely open.
Which brings us to part 3, the dissipative solution. Basically, staying open. If a closed structure leads to this inevitable death by entropy, what's the antidote? The source material proposes adopting what they call a dissipative structure. In plain terms, that just means a structure that is constantly open. The text features this beautiful quote, "Flowing water does not rot, and a constantly used door hinge does not rust." And this brilliantly illustrates the whole idea that bringing in living water prevents a system from decaying. Just like a business without new talent goes under, or a person who stops learning gets a rigid mind, a life structure must constantly bring in new flow to prevent decay. Openness literally equals longevity.
Next up is part 4, the celestial mindset, breaking old frameworks. So how do we actually do this? How do we change our current human structure into the open structure of a super celestial being? Well, according to the text, changing your structure requires a truly radical mental break from traditional earthly frameworks. The philosophy insists that you absolutely must break free from the restrictive structures of family, political parties, religion, and nationality. The author argues that these earthly institutions, while common, actually create rigid, closed-off systems that actively increase your life's entropy.
Instead of holding on to those earthly ties, the text directs practitioners to totally shift their perception
toward vast cosmic visions. Specifically, visions of the 1,000-year world, the 10,000-year world, and the celestial islands continent. The claim here is that by fully absorbing the essence of these massive cosmic environments in your consciousness, you break your earthly isolation. And by doing that, you supposedly adopt the open structure of a super-celestial being naturally.
Let's move to the next step and see how this builds in Part 5, absorbing special energy, fueling the structure. Because look, just having the right structure isn't enough, right? It requires a very specific kind of fuel to run. The author draws on various traditions to claim that specific physical geometries actually dictate the exact type of energy a structure can absorb. For example, the text points out that practices like Qigong and yoga rely on exact physical bodily postures to channel energy. And in the exact same way, architectural shapes matter. The text explicitly claims that a pyramid structure can absorb special cosmic energy, providing way more vitality than just a standard flat-roof building. Just like a flour mill is built to only process wheat, a specific geometric or physical structure only absorbs matching energy.
So, what are the actual steps to absorb this super-celestial energy? The text is really clear and provides exact steps. First, you have to mentally enter the non-material world in your consciousness. Second, you literally visualize a mental pyramid surrounding you. The text suggests making it out of stars, like those at Tongtian Peak, or even making it out of multicolored flowers. Finally, you sit within this mental pyramid cross-legged, forming a specific hand gesture known as a mudra, or you stand with your palms completely open to the sky.
But it's not just about solo visualization. The author places heavy emphasis on your real-world environment. The text contrasts energy-draining behaviors, conflict, arguments, anger, jealousy, against the energy-providing environment of the author's own community, which is known as Lifechanyuan. Objectively speaking, the text claims that joining and visiting this specific community provides the exact peaceful, joyful energy required to fuel your newly formed super-celestial structure, basically acting as a real-world energy source for the practitioner.
Wow, okay, we've journeyed all the way from cats eating fish to thermodynamic entropy, right up to visualizing starry pyramids to absorb cosmic energy. The author's central thesis is undoubtedly bold, that by breaking traditional human frameworks and adopting a constantly open, dissipative mindset, we can radically alter our physical life structure to avoid death entirely. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. Is immortality really just a matter of changing your structure? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep your mind open to the living water.